Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I would like to welcome you to From the Editor's Desk, a podcast where myself and Kyle Brasseur, editor-in-chief at Compliance Week, unpack some of the top stories which have or will appear in Compliance Week each month. We look at the top compliance stories, talk some sports, and generally try to solve the world's problems. In this episode, Compliance Week editor-in-chief Kyle Brasseur and I talk about some of the articles that appeared in Compliance Week in May, talk about some of the articles that will appear in Compliance Week in June, take a deep dive into the recently completed Compliance Week 2022 annual conference, and conclude by talking some sports. Of course, we talk about the Celtics in the NBA Finals. We look at Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban's spat, as well as some other key topics. From the Editor's Desk is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to From the Editor's Desk, a podcast where we unpack some of the top stories which have and will appear in Compliance Week. Look at events, talk some sports, and generally try to save the world's problems. I'm your co-host, Tom Fox.
And I'm Kyle Brasseur, editor-in-chief at Compliance Week, and I'm thrilled to join Tom to take a look back at some of the top stories we published in May, review some of Compliance Week's 2022 National Conference, preview CW stories for June, and talk some sports.
So, Kyle, there were some great stories in Compliance Week in May. What were two or three that really stood out for you or your team?
Yeah, Tom, I'm happy to say we actually enjoyed a record month in May in terms of site visitors and traffic. So really great to sort of have that to be able to speak to. Two of the main drivers behind that were, and I discussed this when we were last together, we had two large special report packages that came together and were published during the month of May. The first being a whistleblower report at USAA that raised some allegations of some violations of law and some poor compliance culture. And then we also had a special report taking a deep dive into ESG at FedEx. FedEx is a company that's been disclosing its ESG metrics since 2008. So we took a look at what those disclosures have looked like and how they've evolved over the years, and were able to speak with some of the compliance folks at FedEx to be able to provide some context to those numbers. So again, a really strong month of May for us, and excited to be able to share that it was a record month for us.
So I was able actually to interview Aaron Nicodemus on the FedEx trilogy he put together, a series of stories, and that's going to go up next Monday on the FCPA compliance report. So I hope our listeners will listen to that podcast where Aaron really talks us through the investigative reporting process, what he was able to put together, and then his three articles. And we recorded that at Compliance Week 2022, which leads me into a topic that we both greatly enjoy. We greatly enjoyed talking about it beforehand, and I think we're going to enjoy talking about it afterwards just as much. So we just completed Compliance Week 2022. I have to say, from everyone I talked to's perspective, it was a rousing success. But I wanted to maybe start with asking, what were some of the highlights for you or your team at Compliance Week?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, one of the main highlights is hearing feedback like that, Tom. We've really appreciated hearing from the community their thoughts, and happy to say it's been mostly positive. For myself, it was really exciting to get back to attending a conference in person. So this was my first in-person conference since Compliance Week 2019, and it was our first as a company in-person conference at the same time. So it was really just exciting to be back. Actually, I'll correct myself. We were in Europe in 2019, but it was just good to be back and see everybody again. A lot of familiar faces that we have that attend our conferences each year, but also some fresh faces there as well. For me, I think a lot of the standouts were, as much as I enjoyed the keynote sessions, and I think the one that many people are talking about is Kenneth Polite, the head of the criminal division at the DOJ. His keynote address was really an inspiring message to compliance officers. As much as I enjoyed those keynote sessions, and I think we had a really strong slate of those this year, It was just great to be back in the room during some of the breakout sessions. The way these panels are constructed, they always do such a good job of interacting with the audience, getting, answering questions from practitioners. And for me, that's the real treat, because I think that that's what we sort of lost during the virtual conference era. It wasn't as easy to have those networking or those feedback opportunities. And, I mentioned this in the editorial panel that we had to close out the conference. My favorite words to hear at a compliance event is something along the lines of, I never thought of it that way. It's a simple gesture, but I think that that's the goal that we are striving for in putting on a compliance conference, is to just get people to take new approaches to how they do their job. Again, we're not reinventing the wheel with any of this. We're not telling somebody for the first time, this is what third-party risk management is. We're just trying to give people some different perspectives and maybe provide them something that they can bring back to their own program. So just such a joy to be able to see that again, be in the room for those sort of discussions, and really looking forward to using the momentum to carry right into our third-party risk management conference in June.
So the Kenneth Polite speech, I should say, it was interesting for a couple of reasons. The first one was he quite vehemently announced the Department of Justice will not tell you how you should have constructed compliance program, and then proceeded to tell us exactly how to do it. And it was very useful information. So that was great. And also, shout out to Compliance Week for transcribing and sending that to us. But the other part was, and I think both Compliance Week, Brasseur, and Tom Fox are going to have to explore this next topic at a little more depth, and that's the CCO certification. And certainly he justified that from the DOJ perspective. I'm not sure he's correct, but I think it's something we're both going to have to watch and write about. But I wrote three other things I wanted to pitch to you, a little bit off perhaps the beaten path of why I thought this was such a successful conference. The first one was, or is, there was multiple companies from the group that owns Compliance Week, your suite of family of companies there.
Yeah.
You had FRA, who was hugely involved in the putting the conference together and running it. And I don't think a lot of readers, or perhaps even listeners, might be as aware of FRA as certainly you and I are, but they provided really the backbone. That also included, you had representatives there from ICA, and they have been at prior Compliance Week events, but I found them much more prominent and much more engaged this year. So it was great to hear about what your colleagues in the United Kingdom are doing. So that was kind of point one. Point two was in the vendor room. There were a number of vendors who, frankly, I had not heard of before. And most of the vendors in the compliance community are well known. They're very supportive. They're at numerous events, and they put on lots of great content and resources for us in the compliance community. But there were some people who, like I said, I'd never heard of, and I thought I heard of everybody. So what that really got me thinking about was something that you just ended with. Well, I really hadn't thought of it that way. And I've always found we've got a lot of innovation in the compliance community. When non-traditional compliance vendors and suppliers come into our space, they look at what you and I have been looking at for many years and say, oh, let's try it a different way, or let me show you another way. And we've really gotten some innovation in that. So I really enjoyed the fact that there were, I don't know if you would call them non-compliance vendors or non-traditional vendors or just new or different vendors. So that was, for me, very, very interesting. And the third was perhaps a little more traditional, was John Carreyrou. One of my heroes for the book he wrote and his investigative reporting leading to the book Bad Blood. He broke the Theranos story. A very professional journalist. He talked about his journalistic process and that of, he's left the journal, but it was then his employer was the Wall Street Journal. And he talked about, yes, these allegations were brought forward. but the research he did, the investigation he did, the confirmation he did, the multiple sources he was able to put together before it even went to print. And it really, to me, spoke to the professionalism of the journalists involved in that case, and certainly his. And I got to ask him a question about, I thought it was going to be about journalists and investigations of businesses, but he made it much broader, going back to Watergate, literally, about the history and the tradition of investigative journalism and how he believes that's such an important part of everyone's job in compliance, whether it was Mary Inman, who was on the stage with him, moderating the session, her role as a whistleblower attorney, perhaps you're in my roles as commentators to people, certainly Compliance Week's role with your whistleblower series. My role as a commentator, numerous compliance officers who were in the room. And so I was very moved by that. He's obviously one of my journalistic heroes because of the work he did for Bad Blood, and can't wait to see what he comes up with next. So those were kind of three. Perhaps the last one's a little more traditional, but he was able to take what I thought was kind of a narrow question and really reframe it to talk about the history and tradition of investigative journalism, but in his mind, why it's so important that a Compliance Week would have a series on whistleblowers and to bring these stories to light.
Yeah, and from the media perspective as well, we're speaking from the same angle here a little bit. It's just always enlightening to hear from someone else who's doing the job and to hear those sort of things. I think it is important too that he mentioned numerous times that these stories are not possible without the whistleblowers and what they put themselves through and what they put on the line. So, it's always reaffirming for our wider audience and for us that you have to put a lot of faith in your sources because their sources are putting a lot of faith in you. So really great to hear from John. Really great to get the some of those different vendors in there, like you said. I think it's a reflection of where this industry is heading, and sort of the fact that compliance is taking on so much more at organizations is leading to a lot of these vendors popping up in these what used to be niche areas that are now sort of becoming cottage industries on their own. Your ESG, your data privacy. It's just a sign of the times.
So let me pick up on the investigative piece that you guys did on whistleblowers. And I guess the thing, obviously you told their story in terms of the facts and the results at their companies. But what intrigued me more, Kyle, was really their personal stories about what they went through. And I think bringing that out really helps people who might think they're alone and no one cares or no one will help them. Did you get any feedback for really that part or that personal nature of the story as opposed to the story in the context of the company or what violations may or may not have been uncovered?
Yeah, when we ran the Whistleblower series last year, the top performing piece of the series was one titled, here's what compliance officers, here's what whistleblowers want you to know. So that was the piece that resonated the most with our audience, was the one that spoke to hey, this is when we're doing this is what we're putting on the line. And it's not so much about the violations here, but more of what we go through. That's a really important part of the story to give attention is what these people go through. When we had the series, and we were very fortunate that each of the whistleblowers we spoke with were willing to speak on video and speak up to their experiences on the record. But many of them, almost all of them, lost their jobs. Some of them really had to cut by by the skin of their teeth for a while. Many of them aren't getting rewarded until 15 years plus. It's a tremendous amount of personal harm that comes to these individuals who are just trying to do the right thing. Each one of these people found fraudulent activity and just did what they thought they should do. And it always is a tremendous burden. So, to see that sort of reception to the series was really reaffirming to us, because when we were in the process of drafting the series and the approach we wanted to take, that was key to us, was getting to the element of retaliation and what it looks like, and having these individuals speak about what they went through. Because that's a part that doesn't get enough attention. We see the large fine against the organization, and every now and then we get an understanding of the bounty that a whistleblower receives, but we don't see what happens in between that. And there is a lot that happens in between that, especially when some of these awards don't go out 10, 15 years later.
So maybe ask you to put your down the road hat on and maybe give us a hint or two about some of the stories that are coming out in June. Although, as we found out last week with Glencore, where it can always be surprised.
Yes. That was one that caught us a little off guard too. But just another case of a story where, again, I was speaking a lot to what Kenneth Polite had said in his speech. The compliance enhancements weren't there when the problems took place, but they're getting there now, and it's reflected in the way the DOJ interprets the case. Because I do believe that the fine could have been much stiffer in that Glencore case, and I mean they agreed to pay over more than $1 billion, but could have been much stiffer if they hadn't made the enhancements that they've made in the years since. Looking ahead to June, we're still coming off the high of the conference a little bit. We've been spreading out the coverage from the event. Really just so much that we were able to glean from it just by being flies on the wall. So a lot of what we have planned is not only coverage from the event, but story ideas that were generated from the event. And for us as writers at the conference, that's the real main bonus is being able to go there and help inform our coverage. Whether it's just a passing comment made during a session or feedback we receive from a member or just an attendee that says, oh, you should explore this. We take all of that to heart. And I mean, we actually have, I'd say, about 5 or 6 stories in the works that are just based off things we heard in rooms and things that people came up to us and said, I'd love to read more about this. And we're really excited about some of the content we have coming. It's still taking form. I know some of the stuff we want to tackle. We talked about during our editorial panel, this new work landscape that compliance officers and businesses will have to navigate, where half the employees are in the office and half the employees are working from home, and avoiding that, discrimination of one or the other. That's a story topic we'll be exploring. We're going to be doing a lot more regarding the situation in Ukraine and Russian sanctions, now that we had the chance to hear out some of these practitioners and what they're dealing with. And then also we had early in the conference a compliance officer think tank that was very informative. Just good to hear from a lot of these leading names in the industry regarding some of the issues their programs face. So, we plan to continue our coverage of that think tank, but also use it to lift off into some deeper dives into some of the stuff of what they discussed.
So I have to say, I also enjoyed the final panel you were on at the end when you wrapped up, not only wrapped up the conference, but I was also intrigued by the things that had obviously struck you and your co-panelists as either important topics to follow up on or new ideas or just things that you guys found interesting. So I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with in June. So we are now to the reason we started this podcast, which is, of course, so we can save the world by talking about sports. And I would say we've had some pretty big news come out of Boston this week, and that is the Boston Celtics, who I think in February were 25-25, are now going to the NBA Finals. And it was a bumpy road. Game 6, Game 7 almost was bumpy, but at the end, the Celtics prevailed. I think they probably were the better team in this series. And maybe what your thoughts are on this Celtic team, how far they've come, and is this a team that is at least positioned for a run of this level for 2, 3, maybe 4 years down the road?
I think it was after Game 6 where Derek White on the Celtics had made a comment of saying, it wouldn't be us if we weren't facing this type of adversity. And that was really what the team went through this year. Like you mentioned, they were really down in the dumps there for a while and really caught their stride late in the season. And so it's not too surprising to see that they haven't had the cleanest road through the playoffs. But I think they proved that that's the type of team they are, is one that's positioned to overcome adversity. So, as a Boston sports fan, it's been a joy to watch. It's been nerve-wracking to watch. Certainly a lot of cardiac moments, but just great to see them back in the finals. It's still hard to believe it because these guys have been in the league for a couple of years, but it's still a relatively young team. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, the two leaders of the team, are still in their young 20s, and they're still finding their footing in the league. So I have to imagine, if they keep that core intact and continue to build the pieces around them, that they are a threat for a few years to come. But, the league has a way of surprising you every now and then, just the same way the Celtics surprised everyone this year. Going into the NBA Finals against the Golden State Warriors, obviously a team that is no stranger to the NBA Finals. I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup. I think the fact that the Celtics have had to play 2 7-game series is probably going to work against them. That's a lot of extra mileage on those legs, whereas the Warriors are coming in a little bit cleaner. But I'm sure it's going to be a dogfight. I don't see many predictors expecting a clean sweep on either end. So looking forward to watching it. Looking forward to seeing what both teams are capable of doing. And like you said, down the road, you have to imagine that if the core is kept intact, I think these Celtics will be sticking around for a bit. That said, the East is tough, and as long as Giannis is in the East, that's a big hurdle to clear every year.
Let me go in a little bit different direction on the Celtics. And it's the following. Well, first of all, I have to say I'm a huge Marcus Smart fan. I'm a big defense guy, but I fell in love with Marcus Smart when he was in college. So to add Smart to Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, that's something that intrigues me. But there's another angle I'd like to maybe explore with you, and that's Celtic pride is well known. The fan base is well known. I'm not quite sure TD Garden is what I remember the old Garden being, but it's still a fabulous place to play basketball and a fabulous place to see basketball. But this team was not constructed by this general manager or this coach. Danny Ainge was the general manager when those guys were drafted, and the current GM, Brad Stevens, was the coach. And when Stevens stepped down, I think he stepped down first, and then Ainge resigned as GM, and a new coach came in, and that coach's name is, I just pulled it up, Ime Udoka. Is that right? Udoka. But this team was literally years in the making, and you spoke about their age, but Tatum and Brown, I think, are 3, maybe 4-year vets.
Yeah.
Smart is at least 4, maybe a 5-year vet. But I think Stevens seemed to recognize he brought great energy and great strategy, but it seemed to me he either burned out or recognized he had taken it as far as he could, and he stepped aside. And then he moved to a job he had never done, which was a GM, although perhaps as a college coach, you're essentially a GM. But he took that role in the pro ranks from a team that Danny Ainge had largely put together. So I was wondering if you had any real thoughts on that sort of culture, that continuity, how Stevens stepping down or stepping aside, however you might choose to characterize it, and a new coach coming in, the team buying into that coach's system, literally to taking the Celtics where they are today.
Yeah, I think it speaks a lot to a lot of those individuals, not only, what they're willing to do and maybe the choices they made, but also to the team to have faith in what Danny Ainge built. It wasn't a matter of, all right, Danny Ainge is gone, we have to blow it up and start over again. They really stuck to it, and they kept that continuity in place by moving Brad Stevens up and having Stevens hire a new coach that he could work with. And again, they had a lot of trust in the system that they had built, and they knew what they were capable of. And that, I think, is often something you need to do with young players. You can't expect them to come into the league and have it all put together in their first year or their second year. And I mean, Tatum and Brown really put it together quick, but we see with Marcus Smart, he's been around for quite a long time. He's the longest tenured Celtic. And, it really came together for him in the past couple of years, but really this year was where all of it came together. That strong defense that's been a trait of his since he came out of college really hit the next level this year. So I think that really speaks to just the organization's trust that they had in Danny and the system itself. It wasn't a matter of, all right, everyone here is new and in new positions, we need to shake things up. It's more, we know what we have here. What can we do around this team to get them to where we think they're capable of going? And I think that's the approach they took at the trade deadline when they were a bit of a 500 team and struggling, was to change up the pieces around that core, not remove the core itself, change the pieces around it, and figure out what we need to get them to play at the level they're capable of, which is, a finals contender. The Celtics have sniffed on the door of the finals, a few of the last several years. So, it's they knew what they had, they knew what they were capable of. It was just a matter of putting the pieces together to get them there. And it worked out. I mean, they're in the finals, and we'll see how far they go from here. But a lot of it is going to be the trust in the system, and making sure that you don't hit the eject button too soon.
Now I want to turn to something that is a little closer to my world, which was or is this huge row now between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher. And it started with Nick Saban all but calling out by name Jimbo Fisher for having the number one recruiting class in America and claiming they were bought and sold, or bought by Texas A&M, and they sold them by NILs, name, image, likeness deals for each of the players. It was so dramatic that the next day Fisher called a press conference to specifically refute the allegations and say, if you want to look at God, don't look too close because it's going to get kind of ugly. So that was the setting. A couple of more interesting factors to me were, I'm of the opinion Saban does nothing that's not calculated. And I say that because the place he made the remarks was to a group of Alabama boosters in the context of Alabama women's sports. And he went completely off topic to talk about this. So Jimbo Fisher coaches at Texas A&M, who beat Alabama last year. And so the questions I had were a couple. Number one, is Saban just pissed off that he lost a game? And we know the answer to that's yes. He's always pissed off. Two, was he telling the Alabama boosters, hey, guys, UT, my alma mater, and Texas A&M are out there using NILs to recruit. And oh, by the way, so is Jackson State with our friend Primetime. We better get with the program. This is all in the context of the literally wild west of college recruiting now, with transfer portals, these NIL deals that are literally worth millions of dollars. The coach's response to this, it was like the epic battle of Zeus and his eldest born son throwing lightning bolts at each other. I've been around college football a long time, and I can remember when the SMU got the death penalty. I can remember when other universities were accused of buying or selling players. When I was in high school, Texas A&M was caught buying a refrigerator for somebody's mother, and that got a player expelled. We've come a long way from that, but this has gone on above the table and below the table for a long time. You're sitting up there in New England. Yeah. You've certainly covered college sports, college football, but it's not a lifeblooded death sports that it is down here. Is this anything new or different than you've heard, or is this something else?
I mean, you're right. We in New England don't pay as much attention to college sports as they do down south. Especially, my alma mater does not even have a football team, so it was hard for me to always identify with it a little bit. But I do agree with you saying that, this is not a slip of the tongue or anything like that. These words are always calculated. And I think that extends to all of these sports. The coaches, players, they know how something can come out of, what you say and how these stories can take on a life of their own. And so it's a little surprising sometimes when it's that straightforward. There was no veiled intentions here. There was no sort of suggestion. It was a straight up call out. And, I think that's the why Jimbo Fisher reacted the way he did. I certainly don't blame him at that point. He had to. But it's not, I think that's the surprising part to me. It's not it's not the first time we've seen something like this, but it's really just surprising how blunt it's been and how in your face it's been. Because I think once that first arrow is fired, then sort of like all bets are off, and now it's a public feud. So as a well outside observer, I know that's what sort of pricked my ears was, wow, okay, these guys aren't holding back, and these shots are not veiled at all. They're really transparent.
So the other interesting thing to me is these allegations were made against Texas A&M after the national signing date. And the response from my alma mater, the University of Texas, was, well, we just got to do better. They did that. We'll do this. We're UT. No big deal. Nobody called out Jimbo Fisher. They said, he got us this time. We're going to get organized now.
That's the right way to do it. Just stay out of it.
So anyway, that's going to be a lot of fun for us to watch down here. And of course, A&M plays Alabama this year, so we're going to get to be treated to something.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Kyle, as always, it's been great. I am Tom Fox, your co-host from the Editor's Desk.
And I'm Kyle Brasseur. Thank you again for joining us, and join us next time.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you for listening to From the Editor's Desk. I'm excited to announce a new podcast series for the summer of 2022. I've revamped Trekking Through Compliance for new compliance and leadership lessons learned. It premieres on June 1 and runs for 80 consecutive days. So if you're interested in the intersection of Star Trek and compliance, this is the podcast for you, Trekking Through Compliance from the Compliance Podcast Network. I hope you will join Kyle and I again next month, where we take a look at some of the stories that appeared in Compliance Week and will appear in the following month.